Right then, we'll make a start. Let me pray quickly, and then we'll come to God's word. Our Father in heaven, you are God, we are not. You're the creator, we're your creatures, and that means you are the one who gives us life. And so we're massively dependent upon you for everything. And we know that we don't just live by bread, but we live by your word. So please feed us this morning and give us life. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you're new to church, right, this book, the Bible, means everything to us here at Gracemount Community Church. And we love it because we believe this is how God speaks to us today. And it is one book, but it's also 66 books. So it's kind of a book and a library. And some of those books were written before Jesus was born, but they all point to him. Some of them are written after he was born, and they all point back to him. But this book is made up of some books of poetry, some books of song, some books are like a narrative story, some books are history. And what we're working through at the moment is a book called Corinthians, which is a letter written by a guy called Paul to a church in a city called Corinth. And it's written about 20 years after Jesus died and rose again. And we've looked at this church over the last kind of 6 months. And we've seen that there's, to be fair, a lot of madness in this church. That's why we quite like it. It's like a mirror, right? But the madness comes because there is nothing else in the world that would put this group of people in this room other than Jesus. That was true in Corinth. But that mad unity, as well as being a good thing, all united in Jesus, at times had become a bad thing. So we've seen this church not just united around Jesus, we've seen them united sometimes around their dislike of Paul. That's not so good a unity. We've seen this church united around kind of liking their old life back in Corinth rather than as Christians. We've also seen them liking the fact that they can kind of be a bit loosey-goosey in tolerating sin. So there's been a good unity, but there's also been bad unity. And what we're going to see ongoing in the book is, despite that unity, good and bad, there is also a lot of disunity. There is some wicked division that could kill this church. So we've seen chapter 1, if you remember, there's some people who said, oh, I like this leader. Paul, he's nice. I'll follow him. Some people say, nah, I'm not having him. I like Apollos. I'm going to follow him. And when these two things happen, what happens to the church? It can get ripped apart. We're going to see when we get to chapter 11 that there's another horrible division in the church, which is where the rich are getting all the kind of food and pleasure and priority, and the poor, surprise, surprise, are getting trampled on and left with nothing. And what we're going to see this morning in chapter 8 is there is another division in the church, and it is a division over food. Now, it's not as simple as us, like after church, saying, right, hands up, who wants to go to the Tartan Tandoori for dinner, and who wants to go to the Friar's Delight, right? Let's go to the Chinese, go to the Walker. And it's not that kind of division. It's not that simple. The division over food is much deeper than that. Now, although this church was united around Jesus, the city they found themselves in, Corinth, was a city where Jesus was not the only religious option on the menu. There was a whole load of things, a whole load of gods, a whole load of lords that you would have followed. And in Corinth, there were these gods everywhere. Now that meant with gods everywhere, you had temples everywhere. And where you had temples everywhere, that meant you had sacrifices everywhere. Now what are you left with when you've sacrificed a lot of animals? A lot of meat. Good. Right? It's a good thing. But that meant that the meat in Corinth often had a kind of religious marinade. Right? It was not neutral meat, it was religious meat. Well, I don't mean you've got cows singing songs and like pigs praying and that. Just that because the meat had been sacrificed in a temple to a certain god, the meat was no longer neutral, but this meat came with baggage. So you could either go to the temple butcher to get your cut of meat for cooking at home, or you could go to the temple cafe and get your meat for having a meal out with the missus. But meat had baggage. Now you may be thinking this morning, listen, if I go up to Captain's Cafe tomorrow morning and get a bacon roll, it ain't got no baggage, so what's this got to do with me? Well, although food sacrificed to idols is the issue that Paul is dealing with, it is not actually the issue. As always, the presenting issue in our lives isn't obviously and normally the real issue. And although we may not share their menu, we do share their humanity. And for them, the issue is not so much the meat on their plate, but the motives in their heart. So let me show you this division over food by showing you like the two corners of the boxing ring. So if you've got one of the sheets, you'll see there's two boxes, and we're going to see these two groups that are potentially driving division in the church. Number one, we're going to call them the knowers. Let's read verses 1 to 3, 1 Corinthians 8. Now, about food sacrificed to idols. We know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. So this group, the knowers, introduce themselves with their motto, and they say, we all possess knowledge. And so although what they're actually going to say, and we're going to see this, it's actually quite logical, and they're really close to being right, Paul subtly gives away where they are going wrong with the word but. Now we love a big but in Grace Mountain Community Church. We saw that on Wednesday night. We see there, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Now knowledge is not a bad thing. Paul's not anti-intellectual. But he's saying that knowledge can have a very negative effect on a human heart. It can puff it up. Now, we've experienced this just in the everyday things of life, right? So imagine this. Imagine you someone comes up to you this week and they go, have you heard that Carly had her baby? Now, what is the most pleasurable thing you can say in response to that person? I already knew. How good does that feel? When you get to trump someone else telling you something by saying, I was in the know. Doesn't that feel good? We love that sense of knowing something that someone else doesn't know so we can tell them that we know what they don't know. Because it does what? It puffs us up. It's a little, in fact, right, we can joke about Isa, right, from Still Game. You know the character in Still Game? Knows everything. Which makes her massively irritating. I'm not saying anything about you, Suzanne, given that's your nickname. But it doesn't matter whether it's the latest gossip or knowing how to fix a car or knowing how to win a trivia quiz at the Northfield Hotel or knowing how to get around the Bible, knowledge puffs us up like a balloon. And every puff in knowledge makes our ego get bigger and bigger and so gives us an even bigger head. And we hate that in other people, but we love it in ourselves. True? Give me a puff. Tell me something. And Paul gives away what his problem is with this first group of people when he says, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. See, knowledge without love only does something to you, whereas knowledge with love leads to others being built up. Here's what we're going to see, big point this morning. Knowledge without love will burst a church. Right, that balloon can only take so much. But knowledge with love can build a church. We're going to see that. And so Paul has a little dig at them early doors by saying, you do not yet know as you ought to know. That's a dig to someone who calls himself a knower. And he continues in verse 3 by explaining, whoever loves God is known by God. Now we're going to get to what defines this group, but notice what Paul is doing. He teaches us two important things about what it means to be a Christian at this point. First thing, being a Christian is not just knowing about God, it is loving God. Right? God is not an it to know, he is a he to love. He's not an idea, he is a person. And the reason we study the Bible is not so we can just gain more knowledge, but that we might grow in our love for who God is. And so Paul wants to build this thing. Knowing God must lead to loving God. And we're going to get a layer on top of that. If you love God, then you must love other people. But the second thing is this, being a Christian is not just you knowing about God, it is about being known by God. Now he says this to deflate our inflating balloon-like egos. You're right, you think you know much, right? You think you know everything. Let me play my trump card. God knows you better. Anyone loves God, he is known by God. Do you know this? God knows you. He knew you before creation began. He knew you in your mother's womb. He knows every hair in your head. He's seen your every movement. He's perceived your every thought. He's witnessed your every action. He has seen what you thought no one else saw. He knows your secret habits. You are known by God. Now that leaves you naked, right? Vulnerable. He knows me. I can pull the wool over other people's eyes. I can try and pull the BS in front of everyone else at church and everyone in front of my family, but truth is, God knows me. And here is the stunning thing if you are a Christian. That when God knew you at your worst, he still loved you. Still. And even when he had perfect grasp of my sin, he still sent the perfect gift of his Son. He knew me, and yet he loved me. Let me tell you, I've said this before, if you knew me, you would not love me. And yet God's perfect knowledge does not leave him to be repulsed by me. It leads him to send his Son to die for me. Now, if that leaves you puffed up and proud, you have never understood that. That undoes you and must lead to humility. Anyway, that's a tangent, right? Who are these knowers? What do they claim about this food sacrificed to idol stuff? Let's look at verse 4. So then, all right, coming back to the point, off the tangent, let's get back. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in all the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live, and there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. Now their logic goes something like this. It's clever. It's really close to being true. Idols are what? Nothing. There is only one God. All right? There is the Father who has given us life and therefore for whom we live. There is Jesus through whom he saved us and therefore through whom we can know God. Idols are nothing. There is only one God, and so they make the conclusion of verse 8 when it comes to food. Look at verse 8. But food does not bring us near to God, and we are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. So their logic is, idols are nothing, God is God, therefore eat whatever you want. They're basically saying, because idols don't actually exist, even if meat is sacrificed to a so-called God, because that God doesn't exist, nothing's actually happened to the meat. So tuck in. One of the big gods in Corinth was Aphrodite. So you can sacrifice your pork chop to Aphrodite, but because Aphrodite is just a figment of someone's imagination and doesn't actually exist, therefore Aphrodite has done nothing to your pork chop, so it's still just a Bob standard pork chop. So what are you going to do with the pork chop? Eat that pork chop. Do you see their logic? Idols are nothing, God is God, food is food, so nom 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 nom. All right, that's the blanks on your sheet.
How do you spell that?
N-O-M, 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 N-O-M. Nom 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 nom. But you see their logic, it actually makes a lot of sense. Idols don't exist, there's only one God, therefore food's good, nom 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 nom. Their attitude is basically, I know I'm right, therefore that gives me the right to do whatever I want. Now what I want to do is show you how this clashes. These people in this corner of the room, God is God, idols are nothing, food is food, so nom 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 nom. How does that clash with the people in the other corner of the ring? We're going to call them the weak. Look at verse 7. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. So the knowers over here say, idols are nothing. These guys say, man, we were so accustomed to idols. Think of them as people, right, who have literally just become Christians. They've just got saved. They're proper new to this whole church thing, which means they've just come out of the world of Corinth, where it is God, 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 Lord, 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 temple, temple, temple. And their whole life was enveloped in that world of multiple gods and eating meat sacrificed to idols. Up until very recently, idols weren't nothing. They were these people's everything. They lived to please and to pacify the gods. They lived in the temples. They sacrificed in the temples. They worshipped in the temples. They ate meat sacrificed to idols. And so although now they've come into the church, they realize idols are not God and only God is God, these things still have a massive impact on how they think and how they live. They are still the thing that they have walked away from to follow Jesus, still the thing they've left to come to church, and still the thing they are repenting of to put their faith in Christ. And so their conscience cannot conclude, nom, 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 nom. Their conscience makes them say, no, 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 no. For them, such meat is not innocent. It is not neutral. In some ways, it repulses them because it's what they've just walked away from. But in other ways, it entices them because it's the old life that they kind of loved. And so at this point, for them to eat meat sacrificed to an idol would feel like cheating on Jesus. And it would leave their conscience defiled and feeling dirty. Think of it this way. For them, eating meat sacrificed to an idol would be like the smell of alcohol to someone with a drink problem. And that drink doesn't just represent a measure of liquid. That drink represents a whole world that they are trying to turn their back on. Which means that meat is not neutral. It has a massive amount of negative baggage. The knowers and the weak. Idols are nothing. God is God. Food is good. Nom, 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 nom. Idols were my everything. God is now my God, but food still has serious baggage. So no, 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 no. Do you see the two groups? Does that make sense? Because if it doesn't, we can't go any further. If you want the sermon to finish, just say yes, 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 yes. Do you get it? Now at this point, if you've ever watched Harry Hill's TV Burp, what does he say? Fight! Right? You just want to see them have it out. And in any other setting, what happens when it is a fight between the knowers and the weak? Who wins? The knowers every time, right? In the world, the educated get countless advantages and opportunities never given to the less privileged. And those who have been around longer somewhere tend to dominate those who just arrive. And the rich tend to protect their own interests by exploiting the poor, and the fittest tend to survive at the cost of trampling on the weak. See, knowledge puffs up, but it puffs itself up often by stealing puff from others. And it inflates itself like a balloon, often by popping other people's balloons. And either the weak must get strong or the weak are gone. And it seems that that's what's happening in the church in Corinth. And Paul is going to say, listen, what is everywhere in the world can be nowhere in the church. Look at what he says, verse 9. Be careful. I think he's speaking specifically to this first group, the knowers. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. See how he starts that? You need to be careful. Be careful, because this could kill Corinth Community Church. This could kill Gracemount Community Church in a year. Without carefulness, this whole thing bursts. Remember, knowledge without love bursts a church. Knowledge with love builds a church. What's interesting to me here, right? is Paul doesn't say, or if you know and they're weak, well, actually, you know her, why don't you just educate them? Why don't you help their conscience get to a point where they realize, actually, the idol's nothing, so they can eat? He does not say, teach the weak so they can become like you. Paul's answer is actually, love the weak by becoming like them. See verse 13? I think verse 13 is mental. Right? It's a very happy meat eater. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again. Never. Paul, mate, you're a knower. Why give up your rights? Why act against what you know to be true? Why accommodate yourself to their weakness? Why make that kind of sacrifice? Because Paul's life was built upon the love that Jesus Christ first had for him. If you asked Paul, mate, how did Jesus love you? How would Paul have responded? He would have said this is how Jesus loved me. That though he was the very wisdom and power of God, he became foolishness. And Jesus Christ became weakness, and Jesus Christ became despised, and Jesus Christ became lowly, and Jesus Christ became as nothing. Jesus Christ became Christ crucified. And Jesus Christ did that to die for me. To use the language of 1 Corinthians 8, I was a weak brother for whom Jesus died. And Jesus became unrighteous to make me righteous, and he became common to make me holy, and he became a slave to set me free. This is how he loved me. And so Paul says, you cannot truly know that love without living that love. A Christian cannot be a Christ one without mimicking that cross-shaped love. Put it this way, right? If Christ loved the weak brother enough to die for him, can you not love the weak brother enough to stop eating meat for him? He says to the knowers, all right, bud, if you claim to know that Jesus gave up his rights for you and exchanged heaven for earth and glory for shame and life for death and being with God for being forsaken by God, if you claim to know that Jesus gave up those rights, but you will not give up your rights for the sake of a weaker brother, do you know what that tells me? Knowledge has puffed you up. And you do not love them, and you do not love God. And if you claim to know that Jesus died to save his church from destruction, and yet you are happy to wound and destroy and defile a weaker brother's conscience, do you know what that tells me? You do not love them, and you do not love God. See, knowing God is about loving God. Loving God always leads to loving others. And an awareness of Jesus laying down his everything for you will lead to a willingness in you to lay down your everything for his church. I think this is why he says to him at the start, you do not know as you ought to know. Because if you know Jesus, destroying this group in the church is not what church is about. Knowledge without love will burst a church. Knowledge with love will not destroy the weak, but build them. Now, are you kind of with me? Now, at the moment it feels right, great, I get that, but how on earth does that apply in Gracemount in 2018? Right? Because we don't have a culture where people are sacrificing animals and then taking the meat home to eat for dinner. In saying that, right, there may be instances where, let's say, a Muslim from our community gets saved, trusts in Jesus. Guess what would be stupid for us as a men's group to do the next night? Go to the mosque kitchen for dinner. Right? That's going to be stupid. That's going to be unhelpful. He's just saved. But how else do we apply this? Well, let me have a go and see what you think. Let me speak to us as a church as a whole first. There is diversity in this room. There's diversity in our membership. Just like in Corinth, you had people who were posh and people who were poor, people from happy backgrounds, people from really hard backgrounds, just as they had people from different cultures, different religious backgrounds. We have something of that in Gracemount Community Church. And listen, that is a quality thing because that puts Jesus in all his wisdom and power on display to our community. What else would put this bunch of Fruit Loops in a room together? Nothing, apart from Jesus. But we'd be naive if we didn't realize that as well as being a massive potential, that is also a massive potential for massive disunity. Whether it's cliques, whether it's tribalism, whether it's inferiority complexes, whether it's arrogance, whether it's gossip, or just plain old sin. There is huge potential for division in this church. Which means we need to remember that what unites us is bigger than what divides us. We have one God, and we have one Lord. And we live for God our Father, and we live through Jesus Christ. But let me tell you, if we live for anything else, we will burst this church. If I make this church about my rights, it will burst. And if you make this church about you, it will burst. But if we live for him, if we live through Jesus, this church will build. I guarantee it. That as people see that actually there is one true God and that Jesus is everything and that everything else is nothing, people will come to love the God who has loved them first. And so we need to fight in this church, but we need to fight not between us, but to fight for unity. We need to be careful. And make sure that the same gospel that saved us is the same gospel that continues to reconcile us to one another. Now let me speak next if you're a newish Christian, right? And there's a few of us in the room fairly recently become Christians. You need to remember that being a Christian is not about knowing an idea, it is about loving a person. To be a Christian is to love God. Now we would hope that in the same way as you get to know anyone else that you relate to, that you would grow in your knowledge of them. And so we do want you to grow in your knowledge of who God is. We'd expect to see a desire to read his word. We'd expect to see a desire to pray in response to his word. We'd expect to see you turn your back on things that would defile your new Christian conscience. But you also need to know, listen, it is tempting as you grow as a Christian and grow in your knowledge of the Bible, not to use that knowledge to get proud. Pride always comes before a fall. And knowledge is not meant to inflate your head, it is meant to fuel sacrifice. And knowledge is not meant to make other people feel small, it is meant to help build other people up. Which means you will not grow as a Christian isolated and apart from this church or any other church. And you will not grow as a Christian without serving and loving other Christians. Remember, love God, love others. Let me speak to you quickly, right? If you're not a member of a local church, right? If you're a Christian, it's kind of, you're on the dating scene and you're dating a few other churches. Now that's fine, right? And you can do your dating thing. I would just say, you need to come to the place where you commit. Chapter 8 presumes intimacy. It presumes commitment. You've got to be close enough to people either to build them up or to destroy them. And it is very hard to meaningfully build up other Christians without meaningfully being in relationship with them. So I'd encourage you not to float, to settle down, muck in, and commit. Because you need to love Jesus like Jesus has loved his church. And love is not just about self-sacrifice and committing to give yourself for others. It is about choosing. It is about saying, I'm going to be faithful here. I'd encourage you, right? I'm not saying you need to marry us, right? If you want to go and marry another church, that's cool. Pick one. Muck in. Next. Last one. Second last one, in fact. Maybe the last one. Let me speak to those of us who have been Christians for a while. And I think arguably we are the greatest danger in this church. Sometimes we can proudly and patronizingly think that the greatest risks in our church are those who are brand new Christians. What I've realized this week is that is utter balls. It's just wrong. If we use our length of time as a Christian, or our ability to locate the book of Lamentations, or our upbringing in a Christian family, or our time in ministry, or the number of books we've read to create a chasm or a gulf between us and newer members of our church, we will burst our church. Or if we think that our well-hidden, culturally acceptable addictions, masked by our kind of stiff upper lip, are more permissible than the more obvious, more outward, heart on their sleeve, new Christian struggles, then we will burst this church. Or if we think that our apparent maturity as Christians or our past faithfulness as Christians means we can live independent and unaccountable to a local church or in a way that belittles our church, then we will burst our church. Knowledge puffs up, which means the more we know, the greater the danger we are. Which means the longer you are a Christian, you do not need Jesus' cross and Jesus' church less. You need them more. And maturity will not be seen in greater puffs of knowledge or greater acts of showing how much you know, but in greater demonstrations of sacrifice. And if as a Christian your legacy is not a built church, then you are probably living with a big head. Knowledge without love will burst a church. Knowledge with it will build it. Does that make sense? Final thing then, and I promise this is the final one. Let me speak to you if you're not a Christian, right? I want to dare you, right? In fact, now I'll double dare you, just because that's what we did as kids, right? I double dare you. I dare you for a minute just to be honest with yourself. And to admit your weakness. Because the truth is, we all love to be in the knowing group. But actually, if you chip beneath the surface for every single one of us, where are we? We are weak. There's a lot of bravado, there's a lot of bull, but we are fragile, we are lonely, we are vulnerable, we are lost, we are broken, we are guilty, we are scared. And a lot of the time that comes because we're living for the wrong thing. We're not living for the one true God. We're living for everything else. But when you live for the wrong things, you put your hope in things that were never meant to bear the weight of your hope. And then when you live for identity, you're putting your hope in something that was never meant to bear the weight of your identity. And when you look to other things to save you, you are putting your hope in things that were never meant to bear the weight of your salvation. And that's often why we feel so vulnerable. Well, let me tell you, the God of this universe is not repulsed by his perfect knowledge of you, and he is not put off by your weakness, but he became like you. And Jesus became like you to save you, to give you a purpose and a point in this life to live for God, and to give you peace and protection in the next life through Jesus. And if you don't know that, then we would love to show you what that means. It changes everything.